216 career wins, some big ones. Obviously, the legendary moment. Seems like everybody's got to have one of those, the bloody sock and all of that. But Curt Schilling, what are your thoughts on him? Because to me, he's got a Hall of Fame resume as well.
I think he could possibly make it eventually because, again, he doesn't have that big number. Like, he doesn't have around 300 wins. Of course, that's going to have to be dialed down because, people aren't just getting that many chances anymore to get up to 300 wins. But, 216, very good. But, the thing about him is he really made his hay in the playoffs. 11 playoff wins, yes, including 5-0. Well, his team was 5-0 in elimination playoff games. So when you had to win the game, you put Schilling on the mound and you won the game. So that really, I think, is going to, really help him out. If he doesn't keep shooting himself in the foot, on social media, getting into big arguments with people, and say what you will about his views, whether you agree with him or not about his, I believe they're anti-evolution views or something. But he polarizes a lot of people by talking about non-baseball stuff on Twitter, is basically what I'm trying to say. If he can avoid, getting people against him for no baseball-related reason, I think that he's got a chance of maybe building up his reputation over the years and maybe possibly getting it.
And I'll tell you what, another guy, just to go the flip side of that's got much better regular season numbers, but, obviously doesn't have the postseason to lean on like Schilling, would be a guy like Mike Mussina. I grew up appreciating him playing for the Orioles all those years. He's near that magical 300-win number, 270. He falls a bit short of that, but, there's another guy, not a Hall of Famer to me. He's in the Hall of Very Good. Schilling would be too, but you hit on exactly why. I think Curt Schilling was a money player. That's one of those guys that came close to coming to the Indians during those years that I go, man, could you imagine if they had been able to get a bulldog like that? And any of those attempted, whether it was going for Kevin Brown, whether it was Schilling, whether it was Pedro, had they been able to put one of those bulldogs on that pitching staff to go with Hershiser, to go with the offense that we had, man. Anyways, what is and what isn't. You can't go back and change anything. But but Schilling's postseason is why I would put him there too. And I've always, Lee Smith, you brought him up earlier, always had a big appreciation for the art of the save, even though some people don't. And then the rest of the guys that we really haven't touched on are all in one way or another painted with the steroid brush, from Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds on down. And you know what? I will say this, I've made my views about the steroids and performance-enhancing stuff clear all the time, but it does speak to, I don't know what maybe this speaks to something good, maybe it speaks to something bad about the votership, but the fact that even with everything that everybody knows, insinuates, or believes about Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, they still got half the votes needed last year to make the Hall of Fame, even with so many people they'll never, to me, those guys don't overcome that scarlet letter. But whether you're talking about Clemens or Bonds or, you go down the list, you got Fred McGriff, who always had, questions. McGuire, obviously, a guy like Walker, Sammy Sosa. I find it funny that, and there's the difference, I think, where voters try to, in their own head, separate if he wasn't, because Sammy Sosa gets 5 to 7% of the votes every year. Nobody has any interest in bringing him even in the discussion. That's the difference between Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa, is I think the 35% of the vote that Barry Bonds gets is the people that say he would have still been a Hall of Famer even if he wasn't on steroids. Whereas with Sammy Sosa, 7% of the people vote for him because they go, he would have barely been a major leaguer if he didn't get on steroids, let alone been. And I'm just kidding, but Sammy Sosa was a skinny, slap hitter. He was not Sammy Sosa when he first started out, as we all know. But what are your thoughts on those guys to wrap things up? The steroid guys, particularly the big name, big ticket ones like Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds.
Well, it's strange because they fall into those two categories, and you end up playing games with yourself. Say, like, if I take the steroids away from this guy, how good would he do? And you're right about Sosa. Of course, Sosa's big home run years were obviously very, steroid-induced. Of course, McGuire's big couple of years as well. But you look at Clemens and Bonds, and you're like, boy, especially Clemens, because there wasn't really a whole lot of indication about Clemens until the very, very end. Most of his, his 16 years of his career, you weren't thinking anything about steroids. This guy's just one of the best pitchers in baseball. And I remember I went on Dave and Jeff Covers Bases once, and I said, Roger Clemens, he's getting old. He's pretty much done. And then, of course, at like the age of 40, he wins the Cy Young Award. And then that's when you start scratching your head. But if you take those last few years out, even pretending that their career maybe ended at like a certain point, you're like, man, these numbers are good enough to get into the Hall of Fame. And same with Bonds. I mean, even if Bonds, even if you only credit him with, say, 550 home runs, like, well, that's good enough to get into the Hall of Fame. But it's hard because then you bring in, what they did and how they sort of besmirched the integrity of the game and the records of the game and just really threw everything off. It makes you not want to vote for them. But from a baseball standpoint, when you say, this guy producing this group of numbers is definitely good enough to get in the Hall of Fame. And it's just like Pete Rose, because everything Pete Rose did on the field was not the reason why he's not in the Hall of Fame. It's why Rose isn't in the Hall of Fame has nothing to do with his entire career as a player with over 4,000 hits. So it's just really tricky. And the fact that it's so tricky is the reason why those guys aren't in. And A-Rod's going to have the same thing happen to him.
Well, yeah, that goes without saying there. One last guy that I want to bring up, because he's another one that I think is a legitimate candidate this year and going forward. He churns right around that 50%. I mean, he's there. He's got a lot of support, but is he going to fall into that category of never getting enough to put it over the top? Tim Raines. I mean, you look at, obviously, to me, a guy like Ricky Henderson, greatest leadoff hitter of all time, but I grew up on Tim Raines, and I mean, I remember him with the Expos and throughout his career. Tim Raines, 800 career stolen bases, 1,300 plus walks, hit 300 for his career, nearly a 400 on base percentage. Obviously, not the big power numbers, but Tim Raines, ultimate, consummate professional throughout his career, did a lot of good things, man. Where are you at on a guy like him? I think, again, he may fall just outside the range of a Hall of Famer, but that's another guy. A lot of respect for his body of work.
Oh, yeah, I think that Raines is probably someone who's not going to get in for a while, but I think like Piazza and possibly Schilling, maybe after a few years, they might get in because their work is so good, and I think it's going to get appreciated over time. So if you look about the art of being a leadoff hitter, and that hasn't been something that's always been in the game of baseball, as far as, a guy who can get on base, a guy who can steal bases. You start thinking about Lou Brock and then into Ricky Henderson. And, of course, Ricky Henderson just dominated the whole idea of that position at most of the same time that Tim Raines was out there. So that's the reason why Raines isn't out there, because isn't already in, because you think great 80s, 90s leadoff hitter, you think Ricky Henderson. He just overshadows him. But that doesn't mean that Raines isn't worthy of being a Hall of Fame. I think he really is, based on, what he could do. He's a very complete player, as well as being probably the number 2 greatest leadoff hitter in the game. So I think Raines isn't going to get in yet, but I think he should get in, and I think eventually he will get in.
And you know what? The perfect, as we wrap this up here, talking about those leadoff guys. And, I mean, we know Kenny Lofton here. I saw Guy Shea on Twitter when we were talking about the unit earlier. He was talking about that play that we all remember from Lofton. But, whether you're talking about Ricky Henderson, who I grew up on, Tim Raines, you got Kenny Lofton. Today, the world of this sabermetrics, and I'm not saying that they're not all magic beans. Yes, there is some stuff to some of that. I think some of it is not worth anything, and some of it is. But in this world where we don't throw away outs on the bases, and God forbid we steal a base and get thrown out, and what are the Royals doing? Oh, they're just running their way to the World Series is what they're doing. To me, baseball has gotten that one wrong, and I think if any team that would have the guts to put out that old school leadoff hitter again would reap benefits. I know it's easier said than done to go find another Kenny Lofton, but I'm talking about that guy who can hit, who can run, who will drive you crazy, who's fearless on the base paths. I do believe that that is not outdated, no matter what sabermetrics will tell you, man, because At the end of the day, having I don't care what your sabermetrics say about the odds of me running from second base all the way to home. I want the guy who's just going to go make it happen, and I don't care what your numbers say. Kenny Lofton went and made it happen. Guys like Tim Raines did too, but I do think he falls just on the outside. All right, man, wrap it up. If you were voting, if you were casting your vote today out of all of those guys, and by the way, the reason that we have these conversations is because all of these names, at most, you're only allowed to choose 10. So no matter if you thought 15 of them were Hall of Famers, and that is, by the way, when I say how did this guy not get, it's because they can only pick so many. But even if you can only pick one, how did Babe Ruth not get 100% of the votes? Anyways, just going back to that one. But who would you put in? Who would be your ballot? How many guys would get in this year? Who would you vote in?
Well, I would go for the two obvious newcomers, which would be Randy Johnson and Pedro Martinez. I would also go with Smoltz because he definitely deserves to be there, even if he might not make it in the first year. And then I think I wouldn't pick 10. I think I would pick 6 that I think definitely need to be in there. I think I would also add Biggio. I would go with Mike Piazza, and I would put in Tim Raines.
You know what? I'm pretty close with you. I think Raines falls just short. I'd put him in if I had the vote, but I think he falls just short. Smoltz, too, yeah. I hope people put as much into it as you were talking about the back end and going in the bullpen as well. Randy Johnson, no-brainer for me. Biggio, I think they correct that. He gets the 1 or 2 votes that he needed. I do put Mike Piazza in as well. I think Piazza's a Hall of Famer. And then I'm up in the air. I don't know. Maybe they make I think Pedro Smoltz perhaps wait a second year to get in. Tim Raines, I don't know. But I definitely think Randy Johnson, Biggio, and Piazza end up in today's ballot going to the Hall of Fame. That's just my thought on how it's going to play out. But if I was voting, I'd also put Smoltz in that group too. I'd vote for today. But, it's easy to say, it's easy to switch a lot of those names out, because Tim Raines, I just made the argument for him. I love that kind of guy. And part of me wants to say, yeah, because I would love to see his style and his career appreciated. So I would go a 5th. I'll talk myself into Tim Raines. I'll go a 5th.
All right.
Pedro, I do think Pedro one more year. I think I would go a second year with Pedro Martinez. I mean, he's great, but he also had some things I didn't like. But I think he's got a chance of going first ballot too, because I'm not casting the vote. Other people are. I think you're on the list. I think of those 6 that you named, 4 to 6 of those are the ones that end up in today. I don't think anybody that we didn't just name in that grouping, I don't see any of the other ones, Bagwell, obviously Bonds and Clemens, and it's amazing what they did to themselves. 800-plus home runs, almost 400 career wins, all those strikeouts, and you can't get yourself in the Hall of Fame because you had to do, whatever, man. Pay the price for, you reap what you sow, as they say. Hey, last thing as we get ready to roll, Jeff Gorman, and we can pick this up next week and talk a little bit. We'll be 4 weeks away from spring training by then, but the Indians did replace Kevin Cash in the bullpen. Cash went on to coach the Rays here. The Indians pick up Jason Bere, and he is the new bullpen coach for the Tribe. Any thoughts on that? I remember Bere. I was talking about him earlier. He was the hot thing for a minute when he came up out of the draft with the White Sox, and I know he did some stuff with the Padres and the Tribe as well too. A 500 pitcher throughout his career, but been there, done that, done some things. What are your thoughts on Jason Bere coming in and being the new bullpen coach?
I think he's going to do very well because I think the Indians have really tabbed him as somebody with a good head on his shoulders. Because he's been in the organization for almost 10 years, since 2005. Yeah. So, he pitched for us in 2000 and then again in 2003. So they really made sure to sort of keep him in the family, and they've been having him around for a long time. So I think that even though Bere wasn't really a bullpen pitcher, in fact, he pitched more than 200 games and he only came out of the bullpen 8 times. I think he's going to do very well out there. I think that he's a young, smart guy, and I think that he's going to excel.
Yeah, I just remember I was in my peak of my baseball card collecting. He was one of those ones that was projected to be hot. He had a lot of gold foil cards back then, and Jason Bere. But anyways, that's the slot has been filled here for the Tribe. Bere, as you said, he's been with the Tribe for almost 10 years, and now he's going to be the new bullpen coach. And an interesting fact to wrap it up, he was the starter and winning pitcher for the Chicago White Sox in the very last game ever played at Old Cleveland Municipal Stadium back in October of 1993. He closed it out. And then he came here to work for the Indians a couple of years later. So, Jason Bere, your bullpen. There you were there. You were there. There you go. I seen it. Jeff Gorman, Indians101.com. Good talking some Major League Baseball Hall of Fame balloting here. And next week we'll be a little bit closer to spring training. I think you and I, the next couple of weeks, start doing some build up to spring training a little bit as the Indians, the majority of their roster in place. We'll see a few more